Hey reader, this is Centaur here, and today we are continuing in our In Defensive series, taking a look at recoilless rifles, recoilless guns. These are effectively field artillery that don't have nearly as much of a kickback and thus are structured very differently and can be dramatically more portable because you don't have those big, long, extensive arms going back or anything else like that in order to help to provide a little bit of added stability for the field gun. These are not particularly common so far in third edition, though there are more armies than you'd think that had these in some way, shape, or form. And so we'll be talking about them as we go along. But in general, as you notice from the picture there, we are primarily going to be looking at the Germans and the Americans, which are the only two books so far in the edition that have these. So to start off with, as we do in the In Defensive series, where we look at something that basically nobody takes and make the pitch as to why you should take it, the first question is, do they count? And as far as I can tell, the answer is yes. I've never actually seen somebody run a recoilless rifle. I've heard some stories of people running them, but I've never actually seen one either in a battle report or on, at a tournament or in any of the lists that I've seen that have been present at tournaments or even in casual play myself. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, there is a shortage of official models. There's only one on the Warlord website, and you're looking at it. It's right there. It's the LG 75 millimeter, so it's basically a light howitzer recoilless rifle available to the Germans. There is a similar variant for the Americans, but Warlord does not currently have a model for it. So because of that, if people are just looking at Warlord and they just want to use official models for bolt action, they ain't gonna find it. And as far as I recall, I don't think Rubicon makes one of these. A bunch of the common alternative providers, War Games Atlantic and people like that, I don't recall any of them having a recoilless rifle either. The second thing is that it's mostly just a lighter medium howitzer, right? So like if you bought a starter army, let's say you bought a starter army for the Americans, and you got the U.S. Army one that comes with the M2A1 105 millimeter howitzer, there's a legitimate question of, do I need another howitzer? Right? What is the value add on it, and why would I want to take that? And so, hey, fair enough. If you already own certain models and you don't necessarily need to buy more, totally makes sense. Another reason why is that it's just not as popular as other artillery choices, right? So, like, when you think about like multiple rocket launchers, that's going to get a lot more wow factor than a recoilless rifle. Right? Especially since, again, it's not like it gains any additional special rules that make it different from a light howitzer. It's just a light howitzer, right? Or is it? Tune in about 2 minutes. We'll see why. Similarly, when people think about like big anti-tank guns, flak Veerlings and things like that, like those are the ones that you see in movies, that you see in TV shows and stuff like that, and they're going to get a lot more attention. Whereas recoilless rifles, like you probably have to be a military you know, aficionado to know that that was like a whole thing and that they're very cool and that they're totally worth looking into and they're worth fielding in order to realize it's even a thing, right? And even when you look in the armies of books that we have right now, they're buried, right? You've been pouring through infantry choices and HQ choices and team weapons, and you get to artillery and you see all of these artillery pieces, and then you see a recoilless rifle that is basically exactly like the light howitzer. And in the case of the Germans, they have a 105 millimeter medium howitzer effectively too. It's also like a recoilless rifle. And you're like, okay, so it's literally the same thing, except in the case of the medium, it only has 3 men instead of 4, right? And a couple of other tiny changes, but otherwise it's basically a medium howitzer. Okay, well, oh, look, AT guns, right? And you just get bought up by all of this additional stuff around you. And so because of that, I think it's very easy to pass it over because there's nothing that makes it suddenly jump out at you and say, you should track me down and add me to your army. Okay. And then finally, there's also just missing profiles for it. So Italy had recoilless rifles. They were used in North Africa. The Soviet Union had recoilless rifles. Admittedly, they came in like really late, and really they'd be more, I suspect, because I can't remember when they were first used, but I feel like they were used a lot more in the Korean War than they were in World War II. So it might be a really good idea for Korea style bolt action, if that's what you want to do. But they did technically have them. And then Japan also had some recoilless rifles. A couple there, I want to say it was a Type 4 mountain gun, if I'm not mistaken, was basically a recoilless rifle. And so, because of that, there's more that should be there, but currently, as of the books that have been released, we don't have any. Now, we're about to get the Soviet Union book within like a month or two. So maybe we'll see it. And maybe once the Japan and Italy books also drop next year, maybe we'll do a re-follow up on this and see whether recoilless rifles are going to be more in vogue. And who knows? Maybe we'll even get new models. We'll have to see. But suffice it to say, at least for the purpose of the series, I think it's fair to say most people are passing over this overwhelmingly. And I think a lot of people would actually benefit a lot from having these. So let's talk a little bit about why. First of all, what is it? It's a really cheap utility howitzer. And by really cheap, I mean it's about 5 to 10 points cheaper than the other alternative howitzers. And it is very, very easy to field. Okay. On the Armies of Germany book, page 51, which is also conveniently Armies of the United States, page 51, is also the one that has the recoilless rifle. So thanks, Warlord. That was very, very helpful for this video. First of all, the first thing you should notice about them is they don't have a gun shield. So you save 5 points right off the bat. And that's the reason why they're 5 points cheaper than other light howitzers, right? In as much as light howitzers sometimes have to start with the gun shield already attached. And then similarly, in the case of all of them, they always have 3 crew, okay? Which means you're saving an additional 5 points on the medium howitzer, which means that this is an 80-point regular medium howitzer instead of a 90-point regular medium howitzer, which is great. And considering the fact that you're not buying a spotter, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it's not like it's an 80-point soft cost that's actually going to be 90 or more points. It's actually close to 80, okay? In addition to that, the Germans get a couple of different options. I am a little surprised as to why the veteran option for the Germans is 5 points more than the Americans. I don't know if you noticed that. For the Americans, you have 45 points regular, 54 points veteran. And then for the Germans, you have 45 points regular, 59 points for the veteran. My gut tells me that the 59 points is actually correct because it's coming down from 65 and a 6-point difference, 5-point difference, 4-point difference. Feels correct to me. But as far as I know, there's no errata on this. Hey, if you're figuring running veteran American recoilless rifles, congratulations, you're 5 points cheaper than your German counterpart. Once again, I just don't really know why, but there it is. So there's that. In terms of special upgrades, you do get access to the stubborn rule on all of these. Whether you're taking them German with Fallschirmjäger, whether you're taking them American with any of the by air and land, the options that you can take. And then, of course, the Germans through the Gebersjäger upgrade, which is only 1 point per man, though you do have to take it veteran, so it'd be a 62-point howitzer. You can also take Fieldcraft on it, which is really great. Personally, I would pass on the stubborn access because when you have 3 men, the only time reliably that you're going to need to take a morale test to see whether you run is when you're down to 1 guy left, because you'd have to lose 2 guys before you end up losing, half or more at a given time. So you're really only going to get the benefit of not factoring in pins once per game, because then when you suffer your next casualty, you're going to be down to 0, right? So I would probably pass over unless you really want to go for theme, or if you're doing a game that involves combat jump and you want to take it as Fallschirmjäger or airborne and you want to be able to combat jump in this howitzer instead of putting it potentially in something like a glider, right? As one example. So that might be one of the reasons to do it, but in general, I'd probably pass on those. Gebersjäger with Fieldcraft, though, I think is worth talking about. We're going to talk about that more later as we go throughout the video, so I won't jump into it here. And then, obviously, in terms of recoilless rifles, when we start adding in the USSR, Japan, and Italy, there's a lot of question marks as to what that's going to look like. It would not surprise me if all 3 of these have a stubborn-esque style option, except for Japan, obviously, because they're already going to have fanatics, right? So, assuming that they keep fanatics on everybody in the new book, which I think is a good assumption, then I think we can reasonably expect that we're going to see a stubborn option for all of them. It would not surprise me if we saw something interesting or different for them. I really do hope they get more than just stubborn somewhere in there. But we'll have to see. By the way, the Armies of Great Britain book doesn't have any recoilless rifles. That holds up because while I believe British engineers were kind of in R&D with a recoilless rifle, they never actually released one. And I don't know. I feel like maybe it got to the prototype phase, but I feel like it didn't even get to the prototype phase. So out of the 3 books we have so far, 2 of them did field recoilless rifles, and we did get those 2 recoilless rifles. So it's very possible that when the next 3 books come out, which are the next 3 that are in line, They might all include a recoilless rifle, so we'll see what happens. But I would anticipate that they will look something akin to this. There'll be a light howitzer without a gun shield. Maybe you get something else thrown in there in terms of like whatever your subtype upgrades are, probably including stubborn in some way, shape, or form. So why don't people use these? Well, obviously there's limited official model selection, right? And I think that's one of the biggest reasons. If people are just shopping around the Whirler website and looking for things that look cool, they're not going to see a lot of recoilless rifles, so they're not going to purchase many. Over there on the right-hand side, by the way, you got a 3D print available to you on Wargaming 3D by QuibQuib. This is for the US M20. So, it fills that role again, kind of light howitzer sort of thing. And as you can clearly see, no gun shield. I don't think we have an option currently to roll it on a Jeep. But if you do have the option to roll it on Jeep, that's pretty cool. And maybe you should take a look at it because it's kind of fun. Wouldn't want to be the guy driving that thing. That's going to be pretty loud. But hey, it seems pretty cool and it looks awesome. The second reason, though, I think why people aren't looking at it is because howitzers are just not in vogue right now. Right now, we see more people taking AT guns than used to in the last edition because, hey, threes to hit is awesome, right? And they've got decent anti-tank, especially for some armies, those early war only armies, especially for the allies. You don't have a lot of really good anti-tank available, so being able to take something that can take pen +4 is really nice, right? I mean, for Greece, that's the highest AP, armor piercing round that they have. So if we're seeing people taking more AT guns, if we're seeing people taking more anti-aircraft guns because they got dramatically cheaper, the howitzer just kind of begins falling further and further back, especially if you're one of those people like me who thinks if it's worth running one, it's worth running two. And so if you're taking, say, 2 AT guns and 2 anti-aircraft guns, then you don't have any more space for howitzers. Right. So so there's just, some things to think about, but I think that's another reason why we don't really see people using them. This is also a howitzer that does not have innate spotter access. It's not particularly uncommon for light howitzers, but for a medium howitzer, that is extremely rare. And so because of that, I think some people are looking at it being like, well, there might be a lot of terrain on my board. So if I'm going to run a howitzer and I want to be able to use it potentially in direct, I think I'd prefer to have a howitzer with a spotter. So maybe it's worth paying a couple extra points in order to field that instead of fielding the recoilless rifle. And hey, if that's the case, fair enough. Also, like Germany and the United States, frankly, they have really good artillery options and a wide variety of them. And thanks to the fact that they're both running solid, strong lines of tanks, it's not like you're ever short on points and then you go back to your artillery platoon and say, what else could I put into this thing since I've got, 50 to 100 points left over, right? And you're generally not thinking like that. So from where I'm coming from, yeah, I could see why a lot of people would say, I'm just going to leave the pack howitzer effectively at home, right? I'm just not going to bring it. And then finally, a lot of people kind of have a thought against static firepower. They want things that can move and shoot in the same turn. So they're going to lean more into tanks. They're going to devote 30, 40, even 50%, possibly even more of their points into their armor platoon instead of putting it into something like an artillery platoon. And that's fine. I'm going to let them finish. That's okay. I mean, I've been a strong proponent for the artillery platoon since 3rd edition came out. So, I'm partisan, I'll be honest, because I started playing bolt action because I like traditional field artillery. So I'm biased, but I do think that there's a lot there. And that's really kind of a nice transition for us to start looking into why you should, in fact, take these. Now, first of all, you'll find that there is a file by Fast Armor that is available on Thingiverse. You can get this for free. Okay, so from a pure cost perspective, I want to throw this out of there. You are not short of ways to be able to field at least German recoilless rifles. Okay, because you can pick these things up for free. Maybe throw some love to the to the bro over at Fast Armor who's building these things out because it's very nice. And I've got one printing right now. As far as I can tell, it prints well. So it's kind of great. But a couple things to think about in terms of offense. They're firing either 2-inch or 3-inch HE shells, which means this is actually a really good multi-purpose tool. It is good against infantry because you're going to hit a good number of them. It is pretty good against armor as well because, even if you take a veteran Sherman, right, or veteran Panzer IV or something like that, congratulations, a 3-inch HE template is going to do pins to you no matter what, right? And in the case of a 3-inch HE template, D3 pins, right? But even then, if you could get it at a nice side angle, because maybe you set them up on really far flanks and you kind of force the armor toward the center through various means, a 2-inch HE template hitting against the side armor will also pin a veteran Sherman, right? So toward that end, I mean, I think it's really fantastic as a multi-tool for you to meet different needs based on what kind of armies you play against. One army you play against might be really heavy on armor. One of them might be a partisan army that has almost no vehicles at all. Howitzers are a nice flex option that can handle both. It is also fantastic against transports, as this is one of the cheapest and most efficient ways to get D2 pins with a light howitzer that's reliable, right? Because yes, you can technically take mortars, but mortars are not very reliable. Maybe you get the 6, maybe you don't, and especially against a transport, chances that they're standing still, so you get a chance later on to do 5s. You might be able to do back-to-backs with, end of turn activation, shoot off the mortar, doesn't hit, beginning of the next activation, fire off the mortar again. Like, you can do that, and it is a good strategy, and it does work sometimes, but it's not that reliable. It's definitely not as reliable as force to hit, right? From a direct fire howitzer shooting across the lane at a transport. But even more so, the 3-inch HE template from the 105 millimeter LG for the Germans is by far the cheapest, most reliable D3 pin generating weapon in the game. At only 80 points regular, you can technically beat it out with a heavy mortar, but one, not by much, because a heavy mortar is looking at, what, especially if you're picking up a spotter, about 70, 75 points. You're looking at 80 points over here, admittedly with less crew, but it's firing direct. You can fire on a 4+ every single turn if you need to. It is fantastic pin generation that you're going to get from recoilless rifles, which is great. In addition to that, the range is really solid. It will reach out to shell objective holders. It will keep enemies from simply camping stuff. It is a great way of dealing with machine gun teams or other, fixed sort of weapons that would really prefer not to be moving in a given turn. And it's also a great way of just defending an objective against any unit that might be approaching. Put this thing on ambush, and when they're moving from cover to cover, hit them while they're in the center. You could wipe a lot of people, even with a smaller gun. You don't necessarily need the really, really big 105 millimeter if you don't want to. Now, defensively, you're looking at 3 men, purchase either regular or veteran. There's no inexperienced option here, so we don't have to worry about that. Alongside cover, I mean, this is great, especially since you're not overpaying for the gun shield. Because gun shields, they do technically have a place. Sometimes you're going to have boards where the only good place for you to camp out is around the corner of a building, and because of that, it can be nice sometimes to have a gun shield. However, worth noting, in general, you want to be in something like a heavy cover scenario, like behind a stone wall or in a ruin. That's like the ideal situation for these kinds of units. And the result is lacking the gun shield is actually advantageous. It saves you 5 points on something you would not be using otherwise, because gun shields don't stack with current cover that you already have. It can pivot and shoot, 6-inch move to redeploy. It's not particularly great. Fieldcraft does allow you to move in and out of ruins and forests. So if you are playing Germans and you're thinking about it, paying an extra 3 points total to the cost of the weapon, admittedly on top of the cost for veteran. So there's that. But just 3 points extra to give it fieldcraft is phenomenally good. Okay. Stubborn, you probably pass on, as we talked about earlier. But fieldcraft, now fieldcraft is really great because it means that you can not only just like move into a ruin if you need to, which is incredible, and not very many, if any, other artillery can actually do that in the game. We'll soon see what Australia gets. And obviously with the Chindits and stuff like that, you get access to those on certain field guns. So, like, it's like there are other people in the game that can do it other than recoilless rifles. But in general, like, I mean, this is an extremely nice way to be able to redeploy, take advantage of better cover, especially if you don't start with a ruin in your deployment zone, but it's close. You spend your first turn just moving up, getting into a place where you're now getting a solid 4+ cover save from regulars or veterans. And then you can just pump out fire for the rest of the game. That's phenomenally good. It's really good. So, huge fan. I'd probably skip on all the other upgrades, but it might be worth taking a look at. Over here, by the way, on the right-hand side, you'll see the Soviet B-10, which is available for military scales. It's more of a Korean War than anything else, but it does exist. So, hey, and I mean, the detail on this is really good. So maybe feel free to take a look at that. You find that on my mini factory. But in general, defensively, it's fine, right? I mean, it's a lot like what we've been talking about with team weapons and artillery in the past. A 3-man team in a good amount of cover that's not purchasing experience, fantastically good in terms of defense. It's maybe not as durable as a full infantry squad, but it will do it'll do its job. It'll hold pretty well. And in terms of utility, there's not much other than the point savings, right? You're saving 5 points on a gun shield, possibly 5 more points on, the medium howitzer because you're only getting 3 crew instead of 4. But there's two other things that they're really providing for you in terms of utility. The first is footprint. As you'll notice by looking at it, it's not very big. And Bolt Action is a game where, yes, there's stats, but there's also size, right? And being a very small, very compact howitzer means this thing can fit into places that other guns just physically cannot fit, which is really, really nice. And add 3 crew to it, it's not like the footprint's getting particularly large, right? So that's really, really nice. It makes it a lot easier for you to get maybe fully out of line of sight from people. You might even be able to fit in a tiny little, alleyway that goes, down, but is overlooking an objective. So you're shooting at the objective, but other units that want to help, they can't see you at all because you're between 2 buildings, right? Which would be really, really, really sweet. And in addition to that, howitzers are also really good at providing board control because a howitzer on ambush can do an awful lot to pin vehicles, if not remove vehicles, especially transports. But they can also wreck infantry squads, right? So like you're psychologically changing the way that the opponent plays the game. You're fundamentally changing their approach by virtue of the fact that you've deployed a howitzer in ways that a lot of other things will not do. Now, there are other artillery options that will also provide that effect. A double, triple, or quad autocannon of any kind will also change the way people play. And I got to see that at the most recent tournament I went to when I played with the Greeks. But a howitzer on its own will also do that. And in this case, we'll do it for an awful lot cheaper. At 45 points regular, it is really hard to find something that can do that much damage that reliably, especially from ambush. So for a sample list, like what can you get out of this? Looking at a 1,250 point list for the Germans, because they have access to 2, so that's why we're going to choose those. First of all, 17 order dice at 1,250 is not a horrible way to do this. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got. We've got a platoon commander with a pistol. He'll be regular, and he's just going to be there to help move up the troops. We'll take two 6-man Gebersjäger units. We'll give them 3 submachine guns and a Panzerfaust. Note that if you don't want to take the Panzerfaust, you can drop the Panzerfaust and add a 7th man to the squad if you want to, which would be a pretty beefy veteran squad that can push if you really need it to. The nice thing is, it's only if you need it to. You don't necessarily, because you've also got 2 5-man Cossack units as well, and those guys are all on horses because, of course, they are. It's the only way you should be feeling Cossacks. It's small. It's a hit squad, but this thing will treat stone walls and wooden walls and other barriers and obstacles as if they're open ground. So, you're able to pretty easily run over things like, say, recoilless rifles that want to hide behind a stone wall as their level of cover, right? A very effective way of rooting people out as necessary. But the Gebersjäger unit, seeing as half of the squad is also tough fighters, could also do a decent job at that as well, if you really needed them to. We've then got our artillery platoon. This is going to come with an inexperienced platoon commander with a pistol. I know that causes you to lose the extra snap too, but I just didn't have the points anywhere for it. It's just the way it worked out. And then we're taking 2 75mm LG40 recoilless rifles with the Gebersjäger unit upgrade. So these guys will have fieldcraft. They'll be able to move in and out of rough ground as if it's normal ground. And then we're also taking 1 of the medium howitzer as well. So we got 3 howitzers, and we're going to accompany that with a Howling Cow multiple rocket launcher. Okay. So we're bringing 3 howitzers plus a rocket system to provide us with some long-range fire support to kind of make sure the enemy can't sit still. They got to keep moving. And if they're moving, they're getting -1 to hit on all of their to hits, which is going to keep our boys alive a lot longer. And if they don't end up moving around, we're going to start hitting some people, and then we're going to start removing dice. We've got 4 mule team toes in order to keep these things around. I am not saying that this is the best option, but one thematic I was kind of going for, like a, Operation Barbarossa. We're moving in, and then kind of doing the whole retreat back sort of thing. But, Eastern Front, wintry sort of thing. We've got our Cossacks from Eastern Europe. We've got our Gebersjäger units, which were assigned to there because of all the mountainous terrain. We've got some mountain guns, effectively, the recoilless rifles alongside a Howling Cow just for extra fire support. And then we're going to accompany that with a Stug 3, a Panzer 3, and a Marder 3. And that's going to give us, some nice heavy AT guns. We've got a nice, machine gun platform. And so the result is that we've got a good number of order dice, 17, admittedly padded by mule teams, but here we are. We got a mix of fieldcraft as well as skilled riders, so we can, for our infantry and our artillery. So now we've got a good amount of mobility options that are pushing into stuff. It is extremely durable. We've got an awful lot of veterans that are pushing up against the enemy. We've got even veteran artillery in the backfield. We got, some regular and inexperienced too, fair enough. But we got DV8, DV9. The Martyr is a little bit on the softer side, fair enough, but we're just getting that guy for some very cheap punch, is all we're doing, and it will work out well. We've got mobile artillery teams. We've got heavy anti-tank guns. We've got, lots of mobile cover in the case of the mule teams. You can technically run a mule team in front of your infantry squads, including the Cossacks, just to give soft cover to anything that's right behind, right? If you feel like you really need cover. And if they kill mule teams, darn, first of all, boo. But second of all, we didn't lose any of the guys that matter, right? So no, not to put too fine a head on it, but there we go. That's how that could work, right? And then we've got it's just a wide range of threats, right? Units that would want to be staying back are going to be pushed around by the multiple rocket launcher. Units that want to be maneuvering up are going to find themselves face to face with a durable Stug with a big gun, right? So there's just a lot of stuff that I think that this can do. So kind of from a deployment and movement considerations perspective, how do you take advantage of this? I think as much as you want to start on the board, you want to start first wave because you want to get as many shots as possible, right? You want heavy cover as much as you can. If it has fieldcraft, this is even easier for you to get to, okay? And it also means that when mortars start trying to headhunt you, or when enemy indirect artillery assets try to headhunt you, if you have fieldcraft, you can just move right out of the ruins that you're in, right? Worst case scenario, you even just move behind the ruins that you're in and then, poke the gun out or something like that. Make it so you're getting heavy cover from anybody who can see you direct, anybody who can see you indirect. They might not be able to see you at all, depending on how the spotter has to draw his line of sight. So, you got some options there. In general, you want to deploy near the middle of your force. You don't want to go down too early, lest they know where to put their mortars. And you don't necessarily want to go down too late because you might have other higher quality things that you want to put down, like recce units or transports or things like that. So, deploying near the middle is typically fine. You want to activate in general pretty late, because you don't want to be firing early on and causing units to go down against your attack, lest they have the number of hits and potentially add to a cover save. We don't want to do that, okay? You can also do earlier mid-firing if you're firing indirect, depending on how much prospecting you want to do versus emergencies. We talked about this during our order prioritization video for determining how you should issue orders to your units. Go ahead and check that out as part of our kind of Learn How to Play series for more on that in terms of what we mean by prospecting. You've got high morale on these guys. If you've got a damage value of 5+ plus cover, I mean, this is gonna be very survivable, which is nice. So you'll get to play a lot of it during the game, probably. Unless you get run over or assaulted by stuff, then there's that. It's also a very reliable activation, especially if you've got a platoon commander nearby. If you're starting with a morale of 11 or 12 on these things, they'll do what you ask them to do, which is really, really nice. So, again, one of the benefits of not having the inexperienced option is the fact that you don't have the inexperienced option, which means that you're not going to choose it, right? But in general, you want to be able to kind of push enemies off of their safe objectives, right? You want to make it so that if they're leaving just a token 1, maybe 2 units to defend a far-flung objective, this howitzer is a great way of being able to put some pressure on that and say, are you sure you want to move up all your forces? You want to maybe pull another unit back so you don't accidentally lose that through a swift action of mine after taking advantage and capitalizing on the work of the howitzer, right? It's also a great way of providing cover fire for advancing troops because you might open up on a unit with a really big HE template and they think, okay, well, I think I'm going to go down against that just so it doesn't do anything to me. Well, the unit that's down isn't firing at any of the other units that are coming up, right? So it's a great way of just trying to move order dice out of the bag. If you do want to activate it early, it means that the howitzer are probably not going to do that much. But it does mean that maybe the rest of your army gets to do what it needs to do, and that could be more advantageous than one shot from a howitzer. So what's the overall value add on these recoilless rifles? First of all, it's durable utility for, 5 to 10 points each, that you're paying more than you otherwise might. If you were going to pay 50 points for a regular light howitzer, why not pay 62 for a, veteran, basically light howitzer that doesn't have the gun shield on it and does come with fieldcraft, right? And again, there's no real downsides because in an ideal world, the only downside that you have is that you're losing the gun shield. But ideally, you weren't using the gun shield in the first place because you had a 4+ save instead of the inbuilt 5+ save from the gun shield, right? So no real downsides for a nice, utility option that's a little bit cheaper, which is great. You can also go in ambush to kind of punish very aggressive forces against flamethrowers, submachine guns, mechanized lists, people who want to have a lot of guys in transports, run them up and drop them out, especially submachine gun sort of stuff for engineers. This is a great unit for punishing that because you set them up, you put them on ambush, and for very, very cheap, you're putting out a lot of pain against the enemy. You're also just less likely to cough up victory points in Seek and Destroy, right? So like, if you're being rewarded for removing units, the fact that you're taking regulars or veterans, very possibly veterans, with cover built in means it's going to take quite a bit of fire in order to actually remove this thing. And it's very possible they might remove an order dice before they end up getting lost. At which point, from a Seek and Destroy perspective, even if you haven't kept the same number of points, right? Even if you're just removing like a shot of opportunity to remove a light mortar team that's on redeploy or a random officer who's moving up to help other troops and or make sure they've got the morale bubbles they need, and you just ambush him and blow him off the field. If the only thing that matters is order dice removed, you're trading equally right at that point, which is not bad. And then finally, because of just how they look and how they're designed, the fact that they're not like other guns, this is a great kind of diorama and modeling option, right? As you see over there, you got options for things like logs, snow. If you're doing this as a Fallschirmjäger or an airborne unit, maybe even just like attach a little parachute off the back. Like they didn't even have enough time to cut away the parachute before they had to quickly assemble this thing because they came in a little hotter than they wanted to. I think something like that could be really awesome. It kind of gives you, again, a bit for the hobbyists, a bit for the strategists, a bit for the historically minded guys in case they want something that did historically get dropped with Fallschirmjäger or with the U.S. Airborne. People like that. It was used very heavily by the U.S. Marine Corps because of the fact that, again, like you can fit it anywhere. It's the kind of thing that's not going to get really massively stuck in the jungle. They're just so compact. And so because of that, very easy to be able to use. But what do you think? Do you think that maybe you're just not convinced on howitzers generally? So of course a recoilless rifle shouldn't be making the list for the indefensive series. Is this the kind of unit that you just really hadn't given any thought to before? But now maybe you're taking a look. Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.